Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Muffling, Emma. Can we figure out where that's coming from?
Right. Is everyone muted?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jen Coach Bordnick with Executives for Health Innovation. We've got a great program today talking about providing high quality cancer care with clinical pathways, an incredibly interesting and esteemed panel of experts with us here today. Delighted to have you join us. We'll get started in just a moment. We have a lot of folks signed up for the session today, so we're going to give them some time to log on. Would love to see where everybody is logging in from. So if you want to jump into the chat room and tell us where you're logging in from, I'm here outside of Washington, D.C. It's a beautiful sunny day. If you are experiencing snow, let us know how much snow you have. We'd love to hear where you are and what's going on in your world. Robin, where are you logging in from? Dr. Zahn. Oh, I think you're on mute. So you're going to have to unmute yourself. Yeah. Ah, so great. We've got snow outside of Vail, dusting of snow. Emma, can we unmute some of our speakers? It seems like they're having some trouble here.
I can't unmute people.
Oh, okay. Natalie, where are you logging in from?
I'm logging in from Nashville, Tennessee, and the weather is fantastic today.
All right. Wonderful. How about you, Dr. Edge?
Well, I'm actually logging in from Salt Lake City, where I'm here for the Orion oncology meeting, a group that's collecting germline and tumor tissue and so far sequenced 30,000 people from 20 centers around the country. And we're
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. Well, can't wait to hear more about that. Robin, Dr. Zahn, where are you logging in from?
I'm logging in from Niles, Michigan, where it's an unseasonably nice day. It's in the 40s today.
Oh my gosh. Any other folks from Michigan, let us know. I see we've got Ontario, our Canadians, welcome. Virginia, Charleston. Wish I was in Charleston at 79 degrees.
So Robin, did you lose your electricity?
No, we were very fortunate. It was all lost just north of us, about 15 miles.
Dan Hayes at the University of Michigan missed a couple calls, and because he had no power anywhere. So.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Ed, where are you?
I'm in Miami for the next 5 hours, and then I fly out. I'm in a conference room in Miami.
Oh, lucky you.
I'll be back in Pittsburgh in the cold and wet later today.
Okay, well, you've definitely got some neighbors here in Pittsburgh, I see. So I'm sure they are jealous. Welcome, Boston. Welcome, Eddie in Houston, Nicole in Chicago. Great to see you guys. Welcome back, everybody. Let us know where you're logging in from if you're just joining us. My name's Jen Kovach-Bordnick. I'm the CEO of Executives for Health Innovation, EHI, and we've got a wonderful program here today. Welcome, Massachusetts, Lisa in Philadelphia, Lisa in Boston, more Lisas, Chris in Canada. We've got a lot of Canadians here today. Chicago, California. I know California's got some weird weather right now, so thanks for joining us. Hi, Susan in Maine. It's good to see everybody here today. Welcome. I've got a couple of quick introductory slides and remarks that I'm going to make, and then we're going to shift over to our incredible speakers that we have here today. And we're really fortunate that we've got these folks. This was a tough panel to get, and I'm really glad that we waited and we got everybody lined up. But I think you're going to hear from some experts today who really across the spectrum, but really understand how these pathways work in and out and have some great experience to share with you. So really thrilled to have them here today. Emma, my partner in crime here, if you could help me with the slides, great. So those of you who are not familiar with EHI, Executives for Health Innovation, we've been around for 20 years, small nonprofit in Washington, D.C. Primarily, we convene diverse leaders and executives, just what our name says, that are working on innovation in healthcare, working on consumer-centered healthcare, lower cost, high quality, all of those wonderful, important things. Bringing together all different folks under one tent. Next slide. So we do collaborative learning like this session today. We shape policy on Capitol Hill. We do a number of briefings and we try to educate those leaders up on Capitol Hill and help them understand what exactly healthcare is and why this matters. And then thought leadership. We do all sorts of recommendations and reports. We do have a couple reports right now out. And we'll put the link up there in the chat box. We recently issued a report on oncology and cancer care, so we'll send that out as well to folks. But this is a really interesting area, and using technology in cancer care has been top of mind and very effective over the last couple of years. So delighted to talk about that today. The core areas that we work on at EHI are patient experience, health equity, digital care, and privacy and cybersecurity. And I think today, actually, we're going to touch on digital care and patient experience. And it's great to, I think we're overlapping here a couple of different areas. So next slide. And finally, just a sampling of some of the organizations that EHI works with. You can see, again, across the spectrum, payers, providers, labs, technology, vendors, researchers, academia, all different folks who are trying to figure out how can we really improve the patient experience and get the right data to clinicians where they need it and when they need it. And that takes a concerted effort from all different stakeholders, everybody working on policy, technology, workflow, et cetera. So a great community to join. If you don't see your logo up there, shoot us an email through the chat and let us know you're interested. Next session coming up, we had a great session yesterday looking at health equity. We're going to have another one April 11, looking at unintended bias and how AI and machine learning actually can address health disparities. A lot of talk about bias right now in healthcare, and we're going to dive into that. We've also got a great report right now online addressing inequity in cancer care. I just referred to that. We'll put the link up there. We've got a great program, webinar on overcoming barriers to remote patient management, and another webinar we had on the future of oncology care. So go ahead and check those out online. And a big thank you to Elsevier. We are a small nonprofit. We could not do educational programs without the generous support of organizations like Elsevier, and we're really grateful to them for supporting this program today and allowing us to share this type of information with you. Okay, so as I mentioned, let me just introduce our panel here. We've got Dr. Natalie Dixon, who's the President and Chief Strategy Officer at Tennessee Oncology. Incredible experience to share with you today. We had her at a recent roundtable. We had all these folks actually at a recent roundtable talking about these issues. And so I got to hear a sampling of what you're going to hear today. Dr. Stephen Edge, who's the VP of Healthcare Outcomes and Policy at Roswell Park Cancer Institute. We've got Ed Rogers, who's the Director of Network Development and Clinical Paths at Elsevier, develops all of these. It's going to talk a lot about how this happens, how these get into place and how they're developed. I know people have a lot of questions and concerns and are wondering where these come from. And then Dr. Robin Zahn, who's a medical oncologist at Michiana Hematology Oncology Advanced Centers for Cancer Care. I'm delighted to have Dr. Zahn join us as well. She actually served on the task force at ASCO that was looking at this, and she'll talk a little bit about that as well. So let's go ahead to the next slide. We're going to kick things off with Ed here, and if it's all right with our guests here today, I'm going to actually address you by first names, make it a little bit more informal here, and we'll start with Ed's presentation, and I'm going to disappear for a couple minutes. Ed, take it away.
Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you everybody for the invitation to speak here today. I was asked to set the stage just a little bit to discuss how clinical pathways are developed to support high quality cancer care, how we can kind of take what we've learned over the last several years and apply it. I've also been asked to speak a little bit about the background on what goes into developing a pathway, as well as how we can adapt pathways to be more personalized to specific patients. And so tackling the kind of the first preliminary component, when I thought about like the easiest way to present this concept out to an audience that may either both already know about pathways, but may also be new to pathways, centrally, and you alluded to this, Jen, most provider-led programs follow the ASCO recommendations for high quality pathways. We're honored to have Dr. Zahn on here, as she was one of the co-chairs of the ASCO task force that helped to define those criteria. And simply in summary, though, if you really want to pare things down to the essence of them, pathways are evidence-based, they're developed with a consistent, transparent process, and they consider different stakeholder input. And it doesn't really stop there. You must acknowledge that you need to have a consistent review process. You also need to keep them current alongside the progression of new published evidence and being able to make them available at the point of need to providers. When I started off, I intentionally led with the definition of the phrase provider-led, as it's acknowledged that there can be interest by non-oncologists, which may have clouded what the definition of value is, and maybe that doesn't quite point towards a simple goal of improving outcomes for patients with cancer, whereas that is the goal that most providers agree upon, and by which the ASCO high-quality pathway framework was developed. For this reason, there's always an overarching element of being able to shield us from potential biases that may be introduced. Also, when I was preparing for this, I thought back when we started our program 18 years ago. One of the central figures that was very influential was Dr. Brent James at Intermountain. He had done work in the 80s that really demonstrated that you can have a patient-centered care system that improved quality and decreased costs. And that also led to, by doing that in a standardized way, being patient-centric. And at their best, clinical pathways are just that. They're tools to better position the patient and the provider to agree upon the best approach for their care. So with that in mind, you start thinking of standardizing. Then the question is, well, how does this be personalized? How do we make sure that this isn't cookie cutter medicine? And it's complex. And even when we developed our first set of commercial pathways in 2004, there were 0 biomarkers that really helped to define therapeutic considerations. It didn't really come until 2006 when HER2 came into a breast pathway construct. But even early on, that didn't prevent us from still balancing standardization with personalization. There were other clinical characteristics that you can extract from the literature to be able to build different cohorts of patients that might benefit from certain treatments versus others. You may be able to see whether patients may have inferior results by being on pathway and perhaps direct to an alternative therapy. Within clinical path, we call that a concept of other patient scenarios. We still allow those other patient scenarios to be on pathway for those commonly occurring presentations. And this allows for a degree of convenience of freedom for both physicians to have autonomy in decision-making, as well as additional convenience on shared decision-making. A good example of that would be the dose-dense adjuvant therapies for breast cancer, where there might be a few variants on how you can deliver those regimens with a balance of risks of toxicity with patient convenience that might be able to limit the number of office visits. And that can not necessarily need to be completely a physician decision. It can be flexible to allow the patient to be aware of risks that they might take on in exchange for convenience. And then the last topic that I want to kind of just preface this call with is just the background on what goes into developing an oncology pathway. Essentially the clinicians and researchers that are involved in this type of work, there are a variety of different approaches around the country, each proving that there are viable approaches that can be taken. But what seems to be consistent is that today physicians and pharmacists at minimum are involved in applying a methodology to how they develop their particular programs. For us at Clinical Path, we have a staff of board certified oncology pharmacists that sit alongside our network of physicians. So the users of Clinical Path have an invitation to participate in the different disease specific or body system specific committees. And we organize around that. So there's a pathway committee for breast, a pathway committee for lung, head and neck, et cetera. This allows for customer participation, for more buy-in from the physicians that turn around and use the pathways in their own practices. And that quarterly cadence really allows for a good ability for discussions of the latest publications and to review feedback that had come from different data elements that come from our program. And the hierarchy that the clinical path team uses is also pretty common in that it's efficacy, then toxicity, then cost. So essentially, again, focused on patient outcome first. So if we can take an approach that's demonstrated superiority in outcomes from an efficacy standpoint, then that becomes a preferred option. If they have similar outcomes for multiple items being discussed or multiple approaches being discussed, then patient quality of life is considered, and you can kind of flip that on its head when it comes to decreasing adverse events or avoiding adverse events. And then if there are multiple options that both have a comparable efficacy profile and a comparable toxicity profile, then cost would be the determinant. And today we do that by using Medicare allowables to cost out a course of therapy. So with that backdrop, that's our general approach at Clinical Path, as well as the general community view as how provider-led pathways are developed. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ed. And now we're going to head over to Dr. Stephen Edge, who's actually got some incredible data that he shared with us before about just how effective these can be. Stephen.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to speak. I'm glad to see the big turnout today. It's great for people all across the country. It's a great privilege to be on the panel with Robin and Natalie and Ed and the group. We implemented pathways at Roswell Park in 2016, starting with a model from the Moffitt Cancer Center, but moved to the V Oncology, which is now the Elsevier Clinical Path Oncology platform, looking at the decision regarding systemic therapy for cancer. We'll talk about that in a minute. Next, please. Roswell Park is a NCI designated comprehensive cancer center. We're one of the oldest comprehensive cancer centers in America, having been continuously funded for our core grant since the inception of the designation program. We like to think we're the oldest cancer center in the country, founded by Dr. Roswell Park, a surgeon, I might add, in 1898. We are located in Buffalo, New York, a relatively, compared to some large metropolitan areas of this country, relatively sparsely populated area with about a catchment area of 1.5 million. We've developed a statewide network now, which we call the Roswell Park Care Network, which includes fully owned private practice or community sites in our Western New York region. But we also have affiliations with hospitals from Niagara Falls through the North Country in Watertown, New York, the Capital District, as well as a health system on Long Island, the Catholic Health System of Long Island. That health system, that network is growing. It's primarily medical oncology, though it's branching into other aspects of oncology and even dermatology. The data that you see here are data for a full year. I think this was the year, calendar year 21, of the number of people at the main campus in downtown Buffalo and across our affiliate network that had entries into the Pathways program, and the number of decisions they had. Of course, an individual might have metastatic disease that progresses, and therefore they might have more than one decision even in the calendar year. So there were 3,300 people in Buffalo with 4,200 decisions, and 1,200 people across the network with 1,300 decisions. Just to highlight that the practices in our community networks are somewhat different from the practices in the at the main campus. Of the treatment decisions that were made at the main campus, 55% of them were for people with metastatic cancer, whereas in the affiliate network, that number was 36%. So they treated somewhat earlier stage disease in the network, which I think jives with what most people think about tertiary referral centers. Next, please. The benchmark that people use with pathways is how often is the treatment recommendation in concordance with the recommendation from the pathway. Pathways, as Ed has said, are largely derived from expert consensus based on guidelines and new data. They tend to be somewhat narrower choices than are represented on the guidelines through the hierarchy that Ed outlined. Most people like to think that 80 to 90% concordance with the pathways is about right, recognizing that that not all patients will have a situation that justifies being treated on pathway. And this shows that, in fact, our community networks, if anything, were a tiny bit higher for some diseases than ours. Overall, the concordance rate with metastatic disease was somewhat lower. While our rates are in the 85 to 90% range, I hasten to add that we don't set any number that we hold people to in terms of concordance, because we think everybody should receive, that 100% of people should receive the correct care. And we actually audit off-pathway care and have shown that the vast majority, virtually all of the off-pathway care was well justified and appropriate, and the on-pathway treatment would not have been appropriate. So we actually don't set any kind of standard that people need to meet in terms of on-pathway care. Next, please. But we'd like to take the pathways beyond this unidimensional was the recommendation for systemic therapy in accordance with guidelines or pathways. First off, we like to have these patient-facing. This graphic that you see here on the right is actually posted in the examination rooms in our busy medical oncology and our specialty-specific medical oncology clinics. In the examination rooms, while the patient hopefully isn't waiting too long, but is waiting for the staff to come in, showing that the pathway combines their doctor's expertise, the best standards, the availability of clinical trials, and their personal needs to arrive at the best recommendations for their treatment. And we encourage them to ask questions about their treatment, about clinical trials, and about their use of pathways. Rather than using pathways as a closed book that patients don't see, we want them to be aware of this. And beyond this, we then use the pathways for other important quality improvement and research efforts. Next, please. These are a couple examples that we use of ancillary uses of the pathways, both independently and linked to other sources of data, such as the EHR. We're able to evaluate practice patterns in a very granular sense. The pathways provide information far beyond just the stage of the cancer or the current extent of cancer, but actually very detailed information about the clinical presentation. And in fact, we found, even though we're at an NCI designated center with the data resources that we have, we find that this is the most reliable source of understanding who we are actually treating for cancer. That translates into our research studies, because an investigator can come to us and say, how many people, I'm putting in a grant proposal, how many people do we actually treat with metastatic triple negative breast cancer every year? And we can give them a concrete number. Most doctors overestimate the number of people they treat by a factor of 3, I think. We're actually doing a research study right now looking at cost of care and the factors that are associated with off-pathway care, looking at the health equity issue as one component of that. We're also using it for care coordination with our affiliates. We are finishing right now a study of multidisciplinary treatment in our mainly rural affiliate practices, and looking at the interaction between those practices and the main center, using the pathways as the starting point for this discussion, and demonstrating that if those patients are treated through in collaboration with the main center, even if that collaboration is simply presentation at the main center tumor board, their treatment path is usually the right way, whereas we've seen a number of cases where they sort of fall off the wagon if they don't engage that. So we use the pathways for those kind of care coordination. We're actually now using the pathway. We've just started a program to use the pathways to help people identify people who would be eligible for advanced therapies. There's a new CAR-T product available for people who have progression or early relapse of diffuse large B-cell lymphoma that needs to be applied fairly early, and we use the pathways to monitor. And we have a nurse who's actually looking at every decision made for diffuse large B-cell lymphoma across our entire network to see if they could be candidates, and then letting the doctor know about this. Of course, we don't tell them they have to send them to Roswell. The people in Albany may go to Dana-Farber for all we know, but we want to promote that care. We also use these to help promote goals of care discussions and end-of-life care, knowing when people are approaching the end of life. So we provide prompts to the doctors based on the pathways. These are just some examples of how we try to use the pathway data for ancillary purposes. Next, please. There are some barriers to this. The physician culture is not necessarily wanting to do more work and more clicks by providers, varies even by our clinics. It's a little more problematic at our main cancer center, where our medical oncologists are highly specialized, many of whom sit on the NCCN panels, et cetera. We found actually much more ready uptake in our community centers that are small, 1 or 2 of providers in rural areas. We try to make the workflow and the IT to make it as easy as possible for providers. And Ed, I need to talk to you about something later that's come up in the last couple of days. And it requires strong leadership commitment from the institutional leadership, or from the very top down, from the CEO down. And in the future, one of the barriers is that we so far only look at the unidimensional medical oncology decision. We need to expand beyond this. Next, please. So that we are thinking in the need to develop end-to-end pathways from the prevention to screening through survivorship and end-of-life care. Next, please. And this is a picture of my son and his wife hiking the Appalachian Trail. This is the end of July on the top of Mount Washington. It looks like the middle of December on the top of Mount Washington. So they hiked the Appalachian Trail last summer. Did something I would never do. They quit their jobs and hiked the Appalachian Trail. So the path may be hard, but it's definitely worth it. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, I love that, Dr. Edge. And I love your call out to Ed in the middle of the presentation as well. Wonderful. Well, I know, and that data is just so impressive, and it's really wonderful and generous of you to share that publicly, because I know that it means it's very helpful.
And somebody asked in the chat, I know we're not doing questions quite
Yeah,
now,
that's
but
okay.
we actually use all scripts. So for a variety of reasons, dating back 20 years, we don't have Epic, and we don't have $150 million burning a hole in our pocket right now to move to Epic. So
That's actually really helpful, because most people don't have $150 million sitting around. Great. Well, folks who have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box there under at the bottom of your screen. I know some folks have put them in the chat. We'll try to keep up with them. We'll definitely get to them if you put them in the Q&A box. So head over there and stick them in there. Natalie, tell us all about Tennessee.
Okay, hi everyone, and thank you guys for inviting me back to talk about our experience. And I was asked to share with you, just to give an overview of our practice, to help define what we think of as quality care and how we think pathways enable that care. To give you a little bit of a picture of our practice before pathways and after pathways, what I'm hearing from my colleagues. How has pathways impacted our patient workflow, our provider workflow? And how do we think pathways enable us to take the best care of our patients? So to start with, Tennessee Oncology is the third largest independent community oncology practice in the US. We have 35 clinics now throughout Middle East Tennessee and North Georgia. We have 15 radiation oncology sites, we have imaging sites, pathology labs, specialty pharmacy, and a very robust clinical trial program, as we were founders for Sarah Cannon Research Institute. There are about 114 medical and radiation oncologists, 94 APPs, we have palliative care and psychology, and we're all supported by 1,400 staff members. We serve about 80,000 unique patients. So high quality is actually part of the mission statement. And we have been part of the ASCO Quality Oncology Practice Initiative, COPI, since the beginning. And we are one of the first 9 organizations to have achieved the designation of ASCO's Oncology Medical Home last year. We're an ACHC and a URAC certified specialty pharmacy. We define quality care as any care that results in optimal health outcomes and a fantastic patient experience. And so we focus on 3 pillars to achieve that goal. We look at 1, evidence-based treatment through clinical pathways. The second is really understanding patients' goals, then managing symptoms through palliative care, and proactive patient management through care coordination and telephone triage. So we focus on pathways. Pathways help us select the treatment path that's in line with the patient's goals. And then we're using the most effective and the least toxic treatment. And we're also considering the affordability of the agent. Our pathways also remind us to consider the new innovative treatment options through clinical trials, which may lead to even better patient outcomes than standard of care. Next slide. So prior to pathways, the practice had no consistent way to track or to document how well we were providing evidence-based care. Other than we would do random audits of charts. But after implementing our pathway program, we had robust reporting on capture, on compliance, on molecular testing rates by disease, by the physician, and also by our practice overall. So now we are able to show that we use pathways consistently and that we're compliant more than 80% of the time. And we are able to show when we're off pathway, why we're off pathway. We provide this documentation to payers, and by being able to do this, we avoid having to use the multiple different payer pathway systems. We're now able to enter into these novel payer arrangements based on the fact that we can automate pathway reporting. We were one of the practices that volunteered to participate in CMS's oncology care model, and we're currently in multiple commercial models, including a very large Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee oncology medical home. And we're considering participating in the new CMS EOM. Also, prior to pathways, there was no standardization in our care plans that we provide to our patients, and there was no standardization in the process in which we deliver these care plans. The pathway technology has provided us with the ability to standardize both the documentation and the process. We've also been able to customize the pathway software to provide physicians reminders for clinical trials and also nudges for palliative care referral. And so this has fostered the growth of our palliative care program. We now have probably the largest palliative care program in the country, or one of the largest. We have 4 palliative care physicians and 10 palliative care advanced practice providers. So what do I hear from my partners today? Well, before, when we were talking about pathways, they really just saw this as something that's just going to add on more unnecessary clicks. But now, with the rapid explosion of information and the flood of new cancer drug approvals, it's really hard for us all to keep up with everything, with the science. And so Pathways gives us the opportunity to get to this information really quickly. It also provides the links to the clinical studies that led to the drug approvals, as well as really nice rationale as to why that treatment was selected. So it's easy to use, easy to review. The pathways have also helped our workflow, right? It provides one location, multiple sources of information, right? Not just on the effective drugs, but on alternatives based on comorbidities. It has references, citations, it has care plans, consents. We have built into it an automatic referral for palliative care. And of course, it has the nudges for clinical trials. It is also a source, it is a way to remind us about the molecular tests that we forgot to order, or also the prognostic and the predictive testing that really should be done. And then, we use several clinical pathways, right? We have our treatment pathways, which is what I've been talking about mostly, but we have other clinical pathway and decision support tools that help minimize the time spent in identifying the most appropriate drugs in terms of what generic to use, what biosimilar, what supportive care medication should be used based on payer preferences. And then within our EMR, we have customized our provider notes that help us address goals of care, advanced care planning, and consents in a very consistent manner. And then we also have treatment protocols for our nurses in our patient management system, and that helps minimize the interruptions that we face throughout the day, because they're now able to address the low-grade concerns that our patients have. So to quickly summarize, clinical pathways is a means that provides us easy access to information on the best treatment, the relevant molecular tests. It allows us to create care plans to share with our patients. It helps streamline our workflow, and it provides reminders and nudges. It provides practice and physician level reporting so that we can target areas for improvement. And it has really allowed us to participate in these novel value-based care arrangements with payers. So that's our experience. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Wonderful. And I know you guys have questions as well for Natalie. So if you want to put them in the chat box or in the Q&A box there below, we would appreciate it. We're going to head over to Dr. Robin Zahn now. And Robin, you were actually on the task force. I know it's been mentioned a couple of times this morning. So if you want to talk about that and then just your experience and lessons learned, and tell us about Michiana.
Sure. So do you have the slide up? Because I can't see it.
Yep, it is up.
So this is Michigan Hematology Oncology, and I've been with this group now for 25 years. We have ebbed and flowed in terms of our size, but we are clearly much smaller than the two practices you just heard from, including Natalie's and Steve. And by the way, it's great to be on this panel with you as well as Ed. So thank you for inviting me to participate. Nevertheless, currently we have 9 medical oncologists and 6 advanced practice providers, including NPs and PAs, and 2 radiation oncologists. We serve patients all across northern and northwest Indiana, and these are the towns that we serve. What's not included is a town where a very, very small rural community that we go to. In fact, some of these are rural communities. And as a result, we have to interact with multiple hospital systems, at least 6, and here's the names of some of them. And each has their own EHR system, and none of these hospital systems has their own clinical pathway program in place. Although one of the systems, because they're part of a very large national system at one point, was considering pathways, but there's been a lot of issues, including COVID, that affected the bottom line of that hospital system. So right now, we are the only ones that have a clinical pathway system, but it's very rudimentary compared to what you've heard so far. We are also COPE certified, as Natalie had mentioned, her group is, and we've been certified for many, many years. I think we came in at the second round. We treat primarily adult patients all over the age of 18, but we do take 15 and 16-year-old men with testis cancer, because 2 of us had trained with Larry Einhorn, who you know is the gentleman who basically cured testis cancer with the IU regimen. We this year have already seen approximately 645 new patients over these multiple sites. So that said, as mentioned, I had the pleasure of co-chairing the ASCO Task Force on Clinical Pathways, and Steve actually had participated as time went on. We had actually 3 products from the ASCO Task Force, including a policy statement in 2016, and then we developed criteria in the development, implementation, and analytics side for pathways, which was published in 2017. And then in 2018, Bobby Daly led an article evaluating the various clinical pathways called Charting the Landscape to see whether or not most pathways were able to be compliant with the criteria set forth. And for the most part, about 100% compliance in the development criteria was what we saw. I wanted to make a mention, because this question has come up several times. ASCO does not develop pathways. They do have a guideline division that provides guidelines, but that was independent of the work that we did. So one of the questions I was asked to address was, what barriers do independent hospitals like Michiana have? Well, we're not a hospital. We're an independent community practice. And as such, you know, we, along with many of the smaller groups our size, are, I don't want to use the word struggle, but I'm going to use the word struggle in trying to keep our doors open. We're feeling the same pressures that many institutions are facing, but because we're on the smaller side compared to the institutions you heard about today, you know, we have had to come up with very creative business models to move us forward. And so we are trying to run on a very thin budget, but be able to deliver high quality and cost-effective care to our patients in the same manner. The other thing I wanted to mention about the region where we practice is that, of course, we have the government insurers, which would include Medicare, Medicare Advantage plans, and Medicaid. But we have a very high penetrance of self-insured plans. And what that means is they may select certain administrators of the larger private plans, but they may not select all of the options that those private payers may offer. So one of the barriers we often will have in terms of implementing clinical pathways is being able to utilize them. So for example, we may have a preferred pathway that we all agree upon. The doctor, the patient say, sure, we think that's the best for our disease. But the self-insured plan, because it's a smaller practice, may not agree with that drug. And so then we have to choose an alternative that they will agree with, or we have to become creative and find a way to get that drug to that patient. And so that does pose some challenges. One of the big barriers for us getting a more complex pathway program is the cost. As you've all experienced, there's a cost in purchasing the plan, if you will, but then also in maintaining that plan. In our area, we are a smaller community, so that means we have smaller resources for staffing. IT support, has become an issue, and it's been a revolving door for us. And of course, in order to be able to have a robust pathway program, you need to have a robust IT program. And we're dealing with so many other issues, including EMR and working with all these different hospital systems, that actually has become a barrier. With regards to the to the physician's receptiveness to clinical pathways, we all recognize that it can be very helpful. And Natalie and Steve had alluded to the fact that it can actually help manage some of the information that we need to have with regards to choices of therapies for our patients. For example, did you do HER2 testing on the patient? Yes or no? And then these are your therapies. Lung cancer, what genomic testing have you done? Have you done A, B, and C? And then what would be the treatment options for those individuals? Oftentimes, at least initially, there was some resistance amongst our providers, our clinicians, because the concern was that some of the newer therapies weren't as quickly being allowed as they would have liked. But that actually has improved, and there's a way that we can actually click the box and say that, yes, there is research that supports this, and we provide that information. So what are the lessons that we learned from the pandemic that influence clinical pathways within our practice? Well, during the pandemic, I'd have to say we never shut our doors. We were open every single day. We saw patients either by telemedicine for non-treatment patients, or we had to come in and we did see them face to face in our exam room, and then treated them in our outpatient in the building infusion suite. So as a result, we just had to make some modifications. But like the rest of the country, what we learned is that we had to try to somehow change the way we delivered some of the infusions in terms of timing to help reduce the amount of face-to-face time that they would have with us, but also the interactions that they could potentially have with other patients coming in and out of the building. So for example, there's some therapies that were every 2 weeks that we went to every 4 weeks. Other therapies that were every 3 weeks, we went to every 6 weeks. These weren't cytotoxics, these were mostly antibodies and immune therapies. But that's not on pathway. And so when we have new patients, we would have to write out the exceptions as to why we weren't necessarily following the pathway. But definitely, the patients also would have some resistance to the pathways during the pandemic, because they really were feeling that a pathway may say the treatment would be weekly times 12 for a particular drug for an adjuvant for breast. And that patient would say, no, I can't do it. I've got the children are at home. They're being educated by Wi-Fi and the internet. They're not going to school. I don't have anybody to take care of the kids. So those are real issues that would force us to take a pathway or take an off pathway choice, if you will, or at least not preferred pathway choice, to something that was going to help the patient be able to get through the pandemic and the crisis that we were experiencing at that time. And finally, the last thing I was asked to discuss, because I know we're running out of time, is how can pathways assist clinicians with health plan coverage issues? And, for many years now, the term gold carding has been used. And basically, there is work being done, and I believe it's actually been instituted in some institutions across the country, that if in fact you're following pathway and you have a history of compliance of some value, and in fact, Natalie and Steve could probably talk about this more, that you wouldn't have to go through the peer-to-peer, with basic treatments when it came to drug choices. I think that pathways personally are going to be much more effective in controlling total cost of care, not just drug costs, but total cost of care. If it could include triage pathways, which we don't have in our pathway system at this time, because that can reduce ER visits and hospital visits, not only for reducing cost of care, but also to improve the quality of life of pathway of patients, so they don't have to go to the ER or to the or stay in the hospital any period of time. I also would advocate for robust pathways when it comes to diagnostic choices, especially in the radiographic imaging. There's new tests coming out, as everybody's aware of. And the question really is are they possibly being overutilized? And are we using them appropriately? And the same thing with genomic testing. Which test should we be doing? We know we might need to know a particular genomic test, but which is the platform that is the correct one that we should be using, or the one that's most effective and yet managing cost? So there's a lot of potential for pathways. I think what you're hearing from me is, versus the larger practices and larger institutions, that there are challenges that are unique related to just the environment that we're in, and the fact that we're smaller and that pathways are not reimbursed by any institution or nor that we're with, and they're not reimbursed by any payer. So that becomes an out-of-pocket expense for some group that already has a very, very slim budget. So I'll end with that, and I'll be happy to answer any question you may have.
Great. Thank you so much, Robin. That's really helpful. And it's great to get kind of a real world example of how an organization like yours actually does this. So wonderful to hear. So let's get Natalie, if you want to come back on screen here, and Stephen, that'd be great if you could join us, get your videos on. Mine is coming on slowly as well. Okay, there we go. And I know we've got a lot of great questions. There were some questions, and you actually answered a little bit of this, Robin, when you were talking about, how do you work with payers and their pathways specifically? Natalie, you answered somebody in the chat box here as well, and I'm hoping you can add to that. So what do you do when the payer does cover or doesn't cover? How does the pathway help you? Go ahead, Natalie.
Oh, you want me to take it? Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we really make an effort to reach out to the payer, create relationships, have conversations, and convince them that they need to accept the pathways that we use, because they're based on NCCN guidelines and they're very targeted to one drug. And so by building those relationships, where we have been able to convince almost all payers except one to accept our pathway. And we use that pathway as part of our quality metrics. And so we're able to enjoy performance-based payments using the pathway that we have. Now, for the one payer that doesn't accept our pathway, it's interesting that when we're compliant with our own pathway, we tend to be compliant with theirs too. So
It works anyway.
Yeah, we're still seeing benefit.
Stephen, did you want to add anything? Pathways and how they interact with payers?
Well, we've used them to demonstrate the quality care and have had some payments associated with them. They're actually now not wanting to do that much anymore. They sort of assume that we're doing it and that we provide good care, so they want us to move beyond. They want us to move beyond it, as do we. I do notice there was a question regarding clinical trials, so whether you need to change things for clinical trials, and I think it's really important that a clinical treatment on a clinical trial in everybody's book, treatment on a clinical trial, and the same thing with NCCN guidelines. Treatment on a therapeutic intent clinical trial is considered on pathway or on guideline.
Great.
Period. End of statement. So you don't have to change anything if they're on a therapeutic trial. Secondly, the pathways and all the pathway programs I'm aware of, and certainly the Elsevier clinical path embeds the clinical trials in the pathway. And in fact, if there is a clinical trial that meets the basic clinical situation, first-line therapy for metastatic triple-negative breast cancer, just as an example, if there is a clinical trial available for that patient, it shows up as the first choice for recommended treatment. And in fact, the doctor has to take an active action on that clinical trial before they can move on to the standard treatments. So they have to say, yes, I would like to have the patient screened for the trial, or no, I'm not going to do that because the patient isn't going to, it's not available at my site. I know that the patient's not eligible for other reasons, but they have to take an active step. And Elsevier works with us, and we only have those only those clinical trials that are actually open today at our center show up in the pathways. If it was suspended yesterday, it won't show up being active
wow.
today. So
Okay.
clinical trials are always an important.
So Vivian, I hope that answered your question there, but it sounds like it's actually helpful if you've got a clinical trial, and I love that. So it's that up to date that it's,
Right.
wow, that's incredible. Ed, how do you guys keep that up to date? I mean, how is that possible?
It's been up to us until recently. Until recently, it's been up to us, not up to Ed. But that's
Yeah,
okay.
but now I guess, how's Elsevier do that?
Last year, we invested pretty heavily in re-architecting around pulling data from clinicaltrials.gov, programming interfaces to build a centralized database. And this year, we're now modeling every one of our customers' trials onto that to alleviate the burden so that we do it one time on our staff so that the rest of our network gets benefit from that.
Yeah.
And we are delighted, Ed.
Okay, and then there was a question here from Tom earlier about what tools and software do you use to document your clinical pathways? Natalie, you mentioned here clinical path. Stephen, I think you said Allscripts.
Well, we use our EM is Allscripts. Clinical Path is a linked separate software. It's launched from the EMR. It does incorporate some information from the EMR. Epic does a little better job of incorporating staging data, et cetera, into the pathways. I think they just have a bigger customer base, so they've actually done that. It's also linked back to the order sets. So when you select dose dense ACT in the pathways, it will then launch the order sets for dose dense ACT when you're done with the pathway. It also takes when you're completed entering your recommendations from the pathways in our system, and I don't know exactly how this is done in every other system, there is a note that is placed into the EMR saying, I took this action on the pathways today, and this is the recommendation we made, and this is on pathway or off pathway. And if it's off pathway, the reason why it's off pathway. And we actually petitioned and Elsevier put in a separate text box for our doctors. They must type something in there, not just a pick list. They actually have to type a reason, and we audit those reasons. So.
Wow. Okay, and then Robin, I don't remember if you shared the different technology that you guys are using. It'd be great to hear from your.
So our practice is archaic. We're still using Mosaic.
Oh my goodness.
And the problem is that the multiple hospital systems we use, they're all over the place, in terms of what they're using for software. So that's been the challenge. Number one, it's the money in switching to a different, software. And then secondly, trying to interface with all the other hospital systems. So it's not an easy fix. There's resources that are necessary to not just financial, but also labor intensive, but also work you'd have to do with the hospital systems, which, isn't always easy because they too, at least in this area, are suffering from staffing and issues just as we are, as well as resources as they claim.
The challenges of meaningful use have not disappeared. We should have a whole nother webinar on EHRs and interfacing with different hospitals, because this continues to be a huge cost for clinicians. So thank you. But I think what we have heard is, so there's all different types of programs and softwares and things that can connect for these pathways. So it's not, it's agnostic, I guess we would say, right?
There's a question from.
Yeah, let me just
Dr.
let me hang on one second, Stephen. So I do want to get to this question about patients, because I'll make sure we have time here. So are patients aware of pathways, and how does it impact their perception of unique and specific care based on their needs? So maybe Natalie, you want to jump on that one real quick?
So I can't say, well, we definitely don't do what Stephen does. He has these really nice posters in his office. We don't do that, but we do provide patients with the care plans. So they see that, there has been some organized thought through this. So we don't necessarily highlight and say, oh, we're using pathways.
Okay. Yeah. And then Robin, how about you guys?
Yeah, so when I'm going through treatment choice of the patient, oftentimes in the room, I'll just show them, the pathway, and I'll show them the data points I'm putting in. I really like to engage my patients so they know exactly what I'm doing. For the most part, they'll say, we'll do what you think is best for us. But then if there's choices, of course, I try to accommodate their choices. So we don't come right out and say, we're using a pathway. I said, this is the path. These are the treatment algorithms is the word I use, that we're using based on NCCN accepted guidelines.
So Stephen, talk about a little bit more. So what does it look like when you talk with patients about the pathway?
Well, we like to, I think really we work very much like Robin does, that we want people to be aware of their choices and spend the necessary time to help them understand it. And both, not just the physician, but the care coordinator and the APP. We are a big center. We have extra care coordinators, and we're not running we're not completely running on the shoestring of many community practices, which are really under fire these days, and it's a real shame what's going on in this country. But we don't just say this is what the pathway says you have to be treated with. As we said, we consider pathways and evidence-based tools to help us make those decisions. And that brings in the other question that was asked about physician autonomy. And we actually disagree. We disagree with people who think that this takes away physician autonomy. And that the question didn't say that it does take it. The question was asking, does it? And we disagree with people who think it does. I mean, with all respect for the pathways, that most of it's mom and apple pie. I mean, it's really very straightforward, which is why even before pathways went in, the doctors were mostly on pathway, because the doctors, medical oncologists in the United States are really smart people, and they really understand, and they really try to keep up. It's really quite remarkable. And a lot of what's in the pathways is mom and apple pie, but we make a big deal to our doctors that going off pathway is perfectly fine. Just tell us why. And don't write a treatise, just one sentence, tell us why they're going off pathway. The classic one I like to say is a woman who had a ER positive, HER2 positive, 3-centimeter cancer, and she obviously should be receiving TCHP chemotherapy with dual anti-HER2 therapy. And our chief of breast medical oncology says, well, I know I'm supposed to do that, but she has existing cardiac disease with an ejection fraction of 20%, and she's quite debilitated, and I'm never going to get this woman chemotherapy. I'm giving her an anastrozole and trastuzumab. You really want to argue with him? I mean,
Yeah.
He just wrote that one little sentence, and that's it.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think this jeopardizes physician autonomy. It's not cookbook. And I think for many community doctors who are struggling to keep up with the rapidly changing scene on every disease site, these are even more of a boon, because I give them backstop to say, make sure that they're not going too far off the left field.
I think that the answer for autonomy, I'm going to kind of editorialize for just a brief moment, is that I agree with Steve and Natalie that we don't lose our autonomy. We just go off pathway. I mean, for us, so we may not get a management fee, if we're not picking, the top choices of that particular pathway. We don't really care. We want to do what's best for the path. What our autonomy is being jeopardized by is insurance coverage. Especially because I mentioned before, we have a high propensity of self-insured plans. And now, we have to consider this. If you have a company that only has 10 people in it, and they're paying a premium, and you get one person that's sick, it wipes out their entire budget. So what happens is that there's catastrophic insurance, there's other things, of course, and we're not going to talk about that today, but it does limit. And I'll never forget this. I had a firefighter who had a firefighting exposure-related lung cancer, who should have been treated with a pill, and he had the right marker. And I had to fight tooth and nail with his, not with the insurance company per se, but the employer and the middleman. And it was the middleman that we had to argue with in order to get that drug. At the end of the day, the drug company was awesome and actually provided for him. And the payers, got in and say, hey, listen, dudes, we got to do something. We got to do something that's right for the patient. But you know how much time that took? And none of that, and I don't want to go back to reimbursement, but we got to pay our staff, and we have to pay our time. And as I said, when you're a smaller institution like we are, we're really trying to, negotiate and always advocate for our patient first.
Let me ask you guys, this came up in the roundtable. How do you think that this could actually help kind of the rural practitioner or oncologist out there who's dealing with 20 different types of cancer? I mean, do you think this is helpful in that situation?
So the short answer is yes, because we take care of a lot of rural communities. And we're in our practice, we are all generalists, although there may be some of us that specialize in something. So we'll refer internally for somebody that's expertise. But as been mentioned by Natalie and Steve, and even Ed, I believe, with the advancing sciences that's exploding, including with FDA approvals and diagnostic testing, which goes back to my point, which platform to use. When it's forcing you to answer the question, did you do your HER2? No, I know that's basic, but the point is, did you do your HER2 testing? Answer yes or no. You remember that. And then, you can't keep up to date with all of these therapies. And so in our particular pathway, we don't have one for uterine cancer. For crying out loud, we need that, and we miss that, so at the end of the day, it does help manage, at least get you down to the right pathway, no pun intended with that comment about what you should be looking at in terms of treatment options. So yes, it could be very helpful in managing.
Ed,
Yeah.
we don't know how you keep it up to date, but we're glad you do.
Yeah, and I mean, that at the end of the day, that's one of the hardest things that faces just the medicine in general, is that medical knowledge doubles every 72 days now. And keeping up with that is no small feat. And so I take my hats off to the oncologists and surgeons that are able to do that.
Well, behind the scenes, maintaining these pathways and guidelines are a big job. That's why ASCO has had very evidence-based guidelines, but they're unable to keep up the pace. NCCN's really the only group that's been able to do it, and they spend millions of dollars a year. And I just saw the NCCN annual report yesterday. There's 1,800 people on different guideline panels, and Elsevier has sponsoring these disease site panels, which lots and lots of time to actually keep up to date. And even then, something will change, and you just can't.
Yeah, and that was a question in the chat. How many participate in the committees, as well as what are their credentials? I mentioned a little bit, primarily physicians. So it's board certified oncologists are the ones that participate in the committees with support by pharmacists. And then we have, it depends on the disease committee. Breast is our most heavily attended. We typically get 4 or 5 dozen physicians that participate in that committee. The smallest committee might have 2 dozen physicians that participate on a quarterly basis.
Right. Well, we've got about a minute left, so I'd love to just do a quick round robin. Quick words of advice to folks who are working on these and incorporating them. Stephen, you want to start?
Sure. I think you need to go down this path, no pun intended. I think our patients deserve it. You're going to have to anyway. CMS is going down this road. And I think pathways need to extend so that they're true end-to-end pathways. And I think one of the questioners that we didn't answer actually asked that question. So
Yeah.
we need to move in that direction.
Robin.
So I agree with Steve. I do think, clinical pathways for oncology can be very effective management tools and a way to manage the knowledge, as Ed had just mentioned. But, there are issues with regards to reimbursement and how you're going to pay for them, how you're going to maintain them. How do you work it into the current business model? And I don't mean from a business standpoint, but from a reimbursement and value-based model.
Yeah.
And I said from day one, when I entered on the task force, the total cost of care is what we should be managing, because the patient that sits in front of you experiences the journey. They don't experience just the drug. They experience the radiographic imaging and the pokes, the diagnostics and the pokes and the blood test, and then the supportive care, and unfortunately end of life. And we didn't talk about that today, but that still sucks a lot of money out of the system. And I think we could do better in general as a community, not the people on this call necessarily.
Yeah.
But that being said, there's a lot of opportunity, and don't let drug choices overshadow the benefit and the opportunity that we have of what pathways can become.
Yeah, great. Natalie.
Yes, I'll reiterate that. Pathways is something that we should do. If you're going to start out doing it, find one that is really comprehensive, looking at all of the disease sites, not just the limited payer types. And you try to engage your peers to help support the implementation and the integration costs of your pathway system.
Yeah. Okay, Ed, you get the last word.
Yeah, I think that, to summarize what everybody's pretty much already said, it's a payer engagement strategy is really what is necessary. Some of the people here have done that. Some, whether it be leverage or lack of leverage with payers, but having some type of a 2, 3, 4 year payer strategy around the movement to either subsidize the cost of implementing clinical pathways or some other a form of being able to just ensure that patients are getting the right care for their disease presentation is, I think, paramount to future business success of cancer centers.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Well, everybody, thank you to our panelists today, Robin, Ed, Stephen, Natalie. Thanks to our participants. Great program. We will be sending out links to this program and everything that articles, and please feel free to distribute it. Everybody have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, you all.